I always thought the hardest part of losing someone was the silence that followed, the empty chair, the untouched room, the memories that suddenly felt heavier than my own bones. But I was wrong. The real pain came after my grandfather's death, when the people who were supposed to hold me together began quietly tearing my world apart. In the days after the funeral, I kept replaying his last handwritten note to me, the one he left tucked inside an old photo album. I didn't realize then that everything he entrusted to me, his legacy, his hard-earned success, the factory he built from nothing, would become the very thing that exposed the darkest side of my own family. I sensed something shifting even before I understood it. A forced smile here, an exchanged glance there, a sudden urgency in decisions that never used to matter. It felt like stepping into a room where the lights were on, but the shadows were moving on their own. And I had no idea that I was walking straight into a betrayal so calculated, so cold, it would change the way I looked at my parents forever. What they took from me wasn't just money or property, it was trust, safety, the foundation of everything I believed family meant. But what they didn't know was that their greed awakened something in me I never expected. And once that fire started burning, there was no putting it out. So the question is, how far would you go when the people who raised you become the ones who ruin you? Before everything fell apart, my life felt stable. Not extraordinary, not perfect, but mine. I worked as an operations coordinator for a small logistics company in the city. Nothing glamorous, but I liked the routine. I liked knowing where things were going, how they were moving, and what had to happen to keep everything running. Maybe that's why my grandfather's factory always fascinated me. Even as a child, I'd watch him walk between towering machines with a quiet confidence, as if he understood every bolt and every heartbeat inside those walls. Outside of work, my life was simple. I lived in a modest apartment just outside downtown, where the nights hummed with passing cars and the glow of neon signs seeped through my curtains. My mornings started with strong tea, a scroll through emails, and music that filled the quiet spaces. Weekends meant visiting my grandfather when I could, sitting with him on the worn wooden bench outside his house, listening to stories about how he started from nothing, how he built everything brick by brick with his bare hands. He never talked about success like it was something to brag about. To him, it was something you protected, something you earned. My parents, on the other hand, always seemed slightly removed from that world. They had their social circles, their constant plans, their obsession with keeping up appearances. Growing up, I often felt like a footnote in their busy lives, but with my grandfather, I was never an afterthought. Maybe that's why I didn't question it when he started pulling me aside more often, talking about responsibility, about legacy, about watching people's intentions carefully. At the time, I didn't realize he was preparing me for something. When he fell ill, the shift in my parents' behavior was subtle but undeniable. They visited more frequently, not to take care of him, but to ask questions. About his accounts, about the factory, about the property. They framed it as concern, but their tone felt off. I tried brushing it aside, telling myself I was imagining things, but even then something inside me tightened each time my father lingered by my grandfather's office door or my mother scrolled too casually through his documents just to help. Still, life outside continued as usual. Work deadlines, grocery runs, the occasional dinner with friends. I tried to keep everything balanced, even though I felt a strange tension building underneath it all. Like the moment before a storm when the air feels heavy but silent. When my grandfather passed, the loss hit deeper than I expected. The house felt emptier, the factory quieter, the world colder. I spent days sorting through his things, reading old letters, flipping through photographs of younger versions of him with machines that looked ancient now. In those quiet moments, grief had a way of softening everything, until I found the sealed envelope with my name on it. That letter changed everything. He left the factory for me. Not to my parents, not divided between us, just me. A responsibility I never asked for, but one he clearly believed I could handle. I didn't realize then that this single decision would break open a darkness inside my own family. I didn't see the danger in their suddenly forced calm, or the way they clung to polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I didn't see how quickly love can twist when money and pride get involved. If I had paid closer attention to those early signs, The lingering questions, the sudden interest, the tightening of their voices. Maybe I would have been ready. But I wasn't. And they knew it. I didn't fully understand how fast things were changing until the day I walked into the factory and realized the atmosphere no longer felt like home. For years, even before it was mine, the factory had been a place where I felt grounded, where the hum of machinery, the soft clanking of metal, and the cadence of workers moving in rhythm formed a kind of comforting backdrop. But in the weeks after my grandfather's death, that familiar harmony felt distorted. People avoided my eyes. Conversations stopped when I walked near. Papers disappeared from desks the moment I reached for them. At first, I blamed grief. Everyone was adjusting. Everyone was trying to figure out what came next. But slowly, too slowly, I began noticing patterns that didn't make sense. Deliveries that left without my approval, payments authorized under my name that I never signed, and meetings that my parents attended as if they were the ones in charge. They always arrived with an air of entitlement, strolling through the factory as though it belonged to them. My father gave orders he had no authority to give, while my mother spoke to long-term employees as though they were obstacles in her path. When I confronted them politely, they laughed it off, brushing my concerns aside with casual reassurances. "You're overwhelmed," my mother had said once, touching my shoulder as if comforting me. "Let us help. It's too big for you alone." But I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt invaded. The shift became undeniable when I discovered duplicate keys to my grandfather's office sitting on the edge of my parents' kitchen counter, carelessly tucked beneath a stack of newspapers. The sight of them sent a tight shiver through me. He kept that office locked at all times. He trusted me with the key, only me. I remember standing there, staring at those keys as if they were evidence in a crime scene. And in some ways, they were. The next morning, I arrived at the factory earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, but I felt an urgency burning in my chest, pushing me forward. When I unlocked my grandfather's office, the scent hit me first, a faint trace of his cologne, lingering in the air like a memory refusing to leave. But something else stood out too, the organization. He had always been meticulous, almost obsessively neat. Yet now, papers were slightly out of place. The corner of a drawer wasn't pushed in. An old ledger he kept on the shelf had shifted. Someone had been here. I sifted through documents until I found a stack of recently printed papers tucked beneath the older files. Contracts, proposals, transfer agreements, and all of them bore my forged signature. My heart dropped into my stomach. I could feel it thudding violently as I scanned page after page. The factory, my inheritance, was being slowly stripped and prepared for sale. My parents were making decisions behind my back, as if I were a child incapable of understanding the stakes. At that moment, something inside me cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, devastating finality. It was late that evening when I finally confronted them. They sat at the dining table, calmly sipping their tea, as if nothing was wrong. When I laid the forged documents in front of them, the room fell silent. My father didn't even flinch. My mother simply sighed. "You weren't ready," she said softly, as if explaining something simple. "We're doing what's best for everyone. For everyone. But not for me." I felt the betrayal like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just the factory they were trying to take. It was my grandfather's trust. His legacy. Everything he chose to pass on to me. Everything he believed I could protect. But my parents weren't the type to back down. When I refused to sign the official sale agreements they presented, things escalated quickly. Within days, they began spreading rumors among the workers, suggesting I was emotionally unstable, unfit to run the place, incapable of handling the pressure. They held secret meetings in the break room. They called suppliers behind my back. They even changed access codes to parts of the facility. Every time I showed up, I found myself shut out a little more. The factory I grew up admiring was being stolen piece by piece, not with violence or force, but with subtle manipulation, forged papers, and strategic lies. One evening, after another exhausting day of chasing missing files and confronting uncooperative staff, I walked to my car only to find a letter tucked beneath the windshield wiper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky. The ink smudged as though it had been written in a hurry. "They're planning something bigger. Be careful." No name. No signature. No explanation. The warning sank into me like a shard of ice. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in my living room with the letter in my hand, staring at the shadows shifting across the walls. The silence felt oppressive, heavy with unspoken threats. I replayed every interaction with my parents, every subtle shift, every odd comment. And the more I connected the pieces, the more I understood. This wasn't just greed. It was my intention. Strategy. They had been planning it long before my grandfather died. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. The next morning, I returned to the factory determined to take control, at least for one day. I walked through the doors with a calmness that didn't match the storm inside me. But the moment I reached the floor, I sensed something was wrong. The workers looked tense, scattered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Then I saw it. My grandfather's office door wide open, lights on, drawers empty, files scattered across the floor. Everything had been ransacked. It felt like the room had been gutted. His handwriting, those neat, precise notes, were torn from ledgers. Old photos were gone. Decades of history had been ripped apart in a matter of hours. I stood there frozen, my throat tight, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was no longer about business. It was personal. And then I saw them. Standing in the doorway of the office, my mother and father watched me with a look I had never seen before, cold, calculated, unashamed. They didn't even try to hide what they had done. Instead, they stepped aside as a stranger walked in behind them, a man in a tailored suit, holding a folder under his arm. My father's voice was calm. Too calm. "It's done," he said, "whether you like it or not." I stared at the man, at the folder he was holding, at the quiet smile on his face. A buyer. They found a buyer. And they didn't care that I was still the legal owner. They didn't care about the consequences. They had wiped the office clean, forged my permissions, and prepared to erase me from the business entirely. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I walked out of the office without a word. My parents called after me, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, irrelevant. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything I needed to know was already burning in my chest. The world outside felt colder than usual. The sky was overcast, thick clouds rolling in, as if mirroring the storm building inside me. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents for who they really were, not protectors, not mentors, not even flawed humans, but predators who believed they could outsmart me, manipulate me, break me. But as I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel, the pieces began to fall into place. The letter, the forged signatures, the sealed envelopes, the sudden interest in my grandfather's accounts, the ransacked office. They were arrogant, reckless, and they underestimated me deeply. I could feel the shift inside me, slow and powerful, like the first rumble of an earthquake before the ground breaks open. I wasn't going to fight them with emotion or desperation. Not anymore. I was going to fight them with strategy, precision, and patience, using every piece of knowledge my grandfather had ever passed down to me. They had started a war, and they had no idea what I was capable of. My revenge didn't begin with rage. It began with a plan. But even I didn't know then just how far I would have to go, or how many secrets I would uncover along the way. And the biggest shock of all? It was still waiting for me. I didn't fully understand how much strength I'd gathered until the night everything finally collided. The lies, the forged signatures, the quiet warnings, the pieces of my grandfather's legacy they tried so hard to claim. It all led to the moment I stepped into the factory one last time, not as the frightened daughter they expected, but as the rightful owner they underestimated. The building was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. The machines were off, the floors empty, and the office lights glowing like beacons in the dark. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips as I walked through the halls, each step echoing with a mixture of determination and dread. I had spent weeks gathering information, speaking to lawyers, tracking down old employees, and digging through archives my parents didn't even know existed. And now, everything was ready. My revenge didn't rely on drama or violence. It relied on truth. Cold, precise truth. My grandfather had predicted so much more than I realized, leaving behind safeguards my parents never knew about. Hidden clauses, secret accounts, alternate ledgers, documentation that proved the factory could not be sold without my explicit consent, and any fraudulent attempt could be prosecuted immediately. I held all of it in my bag that night. When I reached the main office, I wasn't surprised to see them there, my parents, seated across from the buyer in suits they wore like armor. They looked confident, almost bored, as if the entire deal were a formality, as if they had already won. My father's smile faltered when he saw me. My mother's eyes narrowed, calculating, trying to predict my move. The buyer looked irritated, glancing at his watch as if I were nothing but a disruption to his schedule. I didn't say a word at first. I simply placed the thick folder on the table and slid it toward them. The sound echoed in the room like a triggering shot. My mother opened it, expecting, I don't know, compliance maybe, fear. Instead, her face was drained of color. "What is this?" she whispered. I spoke calmly, almost too calmly. The kind of calm that comes when you've been broken down so deeply that your fear burns itself out. "Proof," I said, "of everything you've done, and everything you tried to hide." Inside that folder was the trail they thought they had erased. Emails they deleted, phone recordings they never knew were backed up, financial documents pulled from the factory's original archives, and most importantly, the legal addendum my grandfather had placed on the deed. The one that nullified any transfer attempt conducted without a forensic signature verification. The room went silent. The buyer reached for the papers, reading through them with growing agitation. He threw the folder onto the desk and glared at my parents. "You didn't tell me any of this," he snapped. "You said everything was clean." My parents tried to defend themselves, but their words tangled into excuses, half-truths, and desperate explanations. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not fear of consequences, but fear of losing control. I took a breath. A deep, steady breath that felt like reclaiming a part of myself they thought they had destroyed. "You forged my signature," I said. "You lied to my employees. You emptied accounts you had no access to. And you ransacked that office to erase your tracks. Everything you've done is documented. Every single step." My father slammed his fist on the desk, his composure cracking. "You think you can ruin us?" he shouted. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. "You ruined yourselves," I said softly. The buyer stood abruptly, gathering his things. He avoided their eyes as he walked out, muttering something about legal liability and destroying reputations. The door slammed behind him, leaving only the three of us in the tension-thick room. For a moment, no one moved. The factory hummed faintly in the background, as if waiting for someone to breathe. And then my mother broke. Her voice trembled, not with regret, but with rage. "You were supposed to let us handle it," she said. "Your grandfather should never have chosen you. You don't understand what responsibility looks like." Something inside me hardened. "He chose me because he knew exactly who you were." Their faces twisted, shock, insult, disbelief all tangled into one expression that looked almost monstrous under the harsh office light. I walked to the door, my step steady, my heart pounding in a strange mix of triumph and grief. I paused, turning back to face them one last time. "I've already filed the reports," I said. "By morning, your access to the accounts will be revoked. The lawyers will contact you. Whatever comes next, you earned it." My mother's jaw tightened. My father's fists clenched. Yet neither of them spoke. They just stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as their daughter, but as an opponent. Someone they had created, without realizing it. As I stepped out of the office, I felt my pulse slow for the first time in months. The air outside was cold and sharp, brushing against my skin like a warning and a promise all at once. But the moment I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. One message from an unknown number. "You exposed them. Good. But there's still something you don't know about the factory. Something they hid even from you." My breath caught. Just when I thought it was over, it was clear. The real truth hadn't even surfaced yet. In the days that followed, everything moved quickly, faster than I expected, faster than my parents were prepared for. Lawyers contacted me confirming that the documents I submitted were airtight. The forged signatures, the unauthorized transfers, the tampered records, each one tied back to them with undeniable precision. They weren't just caught, they were cornered. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. My presence wasn't required, and even if it had been, I wasn't sure I could stomach watching the people who raised me defend the choices that nearly destroyed my life. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what they tried to tear apart: the factory, my confidence, and the quiet trust my grandfather had placed in me long before I understood why. The first time I walked through the factory after everything settled, it felt different. Not lighter, there was too much history for that, but clearer, as if a fog had finally lifted. The workers who once avoided my gaze now approached me cautiously, offering hesitant nods, small smiles, soft apologies for believing the rumors. I didn't blame them. We were all misled in different ways. I spent weeks repairing the damage, physically and emotionally. Files were restored, machinery serviced, accounts secured. Each task felt like reclaiming a small piece of what had been stolen from me. But beneath the progress, I carried a heaviness I didn't anticipate, a strange mix of victory and grief that sat deep in my chest. Because revenge isn't clean, no matter how justified it feels. It leaves marks, shadows, echoes that linger long after the dust settles. The anonymous message, the one that hinted at secrets buried deeper than the betrayal I already knew, took longer to unravel. But eventually, after digging through old storage rooms and dusty archives, I found it. A hidden set of documents my parents had tried to conceal years before my grandfather died. Records showing that they had siphoned money from the factory long before his illness. Quiet theft disguised as family loans. Money they never intended to repay. That realization hit harder than any confrontation. Not because of the fraud, but because it proved something far more painful. The betrayal didn't begin with my inheritance. It had been happening for years, silently eroding trust while I remained blissfully unaware. And yet, knowing the full extent of the truth didn't harden me. It didn't turn me cold or bitter the way I once feared it would. Instead, it clarified something I hadn't understood until the very end. My revenge wasn't just about punishing them. It was about freeing myself from manipulation, from fear, from the version of family I once believed I had. As legal consequences tightened around them, my parents reached out. Emails, letters, voicemails laced with pleas, excuses, half-hearted apologies. I read a few of the messages, but none of them touched me the way they once would have. I had already spent too long drowning in their choices. I wasn't going back under. Some nights, I wondered whether my grandfather foresaw all of this. Whether he knew choosing me would ignite a wildfire he couldn't prevent. The thought haunted me, but it also strengthened me. Because if he trusted me enough to face the truth, even the kind that destroys illusions, then I owed it to him to rise from it. The real turning point came weeks later, when I stood alone in his old office, the one they had ransacked, now restored piece by piece. I ran my fingers over the carved wooden desk, feeling the grooves he had worn into it over decades of work. In that quiet space, surrounded by the remnants of his life and the weight of my own choices, I realized that revenge had changed me. Not by breaking me, but by forcing me to outgrow the person who tolerated disrespect for the sake of peace. It taught me that justice isn't always handed down. It's built through painful decisions, uncomfortable truths, and the courage to confront what we'd rather avoid. It taught me that sometimes the biggest betrayal comes from the people closest to us, and surviving it means redefining who we are without them. And most importantly, it taught me that legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about strength, resilience, the ability to protect what matters, even when the threat comes from your own blood. Today, the factory stands not just as a business, but as a reminder of everything I survived. I walk its halls with a sense of ownership I never felt before, not because of the title, but because I fought for it. I earned it in ways I never wanted to, but ways that shaped me nonetheless. Do I regret what I did?
No.
But I do carry the weight of it, because revenge, no matter how justified, is never without its price. And maybe that's the real message behind my story, that justice is powerful, but it's never painless. That sometimes the people we love most are the ones we must stand against. That strength isn't found in avoiding conflict, but in facing it head-on with the truth as your weapon. So I'll leave you with this. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones who try to break you, do you walk away and let them win? Or do you rise, fight back, and reclaim the life they tried to steal? Because in the end, the answer you choose might just determine who you become.